When Christ told us not to use vain repetitions in prayer, he simply meant that we should not pray like the pagans do. Why? Because the pagans, as Christ said himself, they rely on their repetitions. So they are relying on their own efforts. And relying on your own efforts will wear you out eventually. So what pagans do work. It works. So it's effective. But it has side effects that will backfire on you later on. Seek like this. If you have headache, a little bit of headache, and you wanted to take a painkiller, let's say there's a specific painkiller that's quite popular, and you go to the pharmacy to purchase it. But then the cashier tells you, sir, this medicine works effectively immediately, your headache is gone, but there are some side effects. Then you ask which side effects? Well, read behind the package. Then you read behind the package, and then you read and think, what? Risk on heart attacks, kidney failures. You read all of that and you think, what? Are you serious? You asked the cashier and he said, yeah, the specialist put it there so people know that those are the potential side effects. And then you realize, oh, no, 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 no. Take it back. I found other ways to deal with headache. Why? Because that medicine, that pill, was a vain solution. It was a solution, but a short-lived one. And not only was it a short-lived solution, it was also a solution with, let me say this, it was a short-term solution. It wasn't really a solution. It was a short-term fix followed by long-term damage. So it wasn't worth it. So that pill was a vain solution, which means it wasn't a solution at all. So vain repetitions are understood in this context. Those repetitions work, but because they're based on self-effort, it will backfire on you. It works, but there are side effects, and God doesn't want you to put up with those side effects. So there's nothing wrong with repetition, because human beings learn through repetition. When you were a small kid and you wanted to walk, how many times did you fail? You probably don't even remember. Maybe your parents don't even remember. You fell countless of times, but you kept doing it, and that's why you're walking today. So repetition is natural. Redundancy is natural also to some extent. However, some repetitions can become toxic onto you. So that's why Christ said, pray, but not like the heathen do, not like the pagans do. In Luke chapter 18, verse 1, let me read. And he, that's Christ, spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. A little bit old-fashioned English, but it's saying Christ gave them parable because Christ wanted to teach them that you should always pray and never faint. Now, to faint means that you are so exhausted that you just fall down, you collapse, you can't do anything anymore. If you worked all day long in the mine and you return home and so exhausted, you don't hear clearly anymore, you can't even function well anymore, you're so exhausted, you're drained, you have to sleep. And in the worst cases, you collapse, you need to go to an hospital. That is what it means to faint. So hold on a minute. If you have to keep praying, that includes repetition. It's not only repetition, but that includes repetition. How will you not faint? That can only happen when you walk in the power. Because if you operate by your own strength or by your own understanding, you will faint sooner or later. Because you are a finite creature. Christ wants you to rely on his power because he is infinite. Which means he, as a being, can never faint. That means when you walk in his strength, when his strength is expressed through your weakness will not be a barrier anymore. Your weakness will not be considered an, a liability anymore by you, because people often consider their own natural weaknesses and their human vulnerability as a liability, but that's not true. Your natural weakness, your natural vulnerability is an asset for God's strength to be revealed and expressed through you. That's why in prayer you rely on His strength, not on your own. That means you don't rely on your own repetitions. If there are repetitions, those repetitions are in line with Christ, and those repetitions will build you up instead of those repetitions draining you to get an outcome. Because that's how it works in paganism. You have those rituals and with those repetitions, they work, but eventually you are exhausted. So now you need to cope with being exhausted. So that's how the paranormal works. It works, it's effective, but it goes at your expense eventually. So you have to pray. That means pray ought to be your lifestyle, and because you do it in a Christ-centered manner, you won't faint. You will have in your bodily weaknesses, so you will still need food, water, sleep, and all of that. But that's not a problem because your natural weakness, the natural vulnerability, is an asset for God's glory because you operate in His glory. Okay? Now go to verse 2 of Luke chapter 18, saying, there was in a city a judge. That was common in the Roman Empire and also outside of it. In every city there were judges in case there was civil unrest or there were criminal offenses. Well, such things happen, or there were civil cases. There was in a city a judge which feared not God, neither regarded men. And there was a widow in that city, and she came unto him, saying, avenge me of mine adversaries. And he would not for a while, but afterwards he said within himself, though I fear not God nor regard men, yet because his widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. And the Lord said, as God said, hear what the unjust judge said. Okay, it goes further. That part, but I'm going to leave it here because I want to focus on what I just read. You have this individual who is so self-absorbed he doesn't consider anyone else. It's only about him. You have females like that also. Okay, and this individual has a position, and he thinks because he has a position, he can just do what he wants, think however he thinks, feel however he feels, and people just have to find a way to deal with it because he wants it. He is self-entitled. And because he's self-entitled, he thinks that whatever he wants, that's good because he has his reasons. When others do things that don't line up with his expectations, then they're wrong. So he's so self-occupied, focused on himself. Well, that's a common thing that often happens in the world. Not everyone in the world is like this, but it's a common thing in the world. And that can lead to trouble and to much harm. So you have this widow who has a legitimate need. She doesn't go to his office because she likes to be there. She's not looking for sexual favors. She's not trying to bribe him. She's not trying to get something out of him. She doesn't want a relationship, nothing of that. She has a legitimate need. She's a widow, that means her husband is gone. She's in financial difficulty because that's how it was during that time. So she has people that are after her. Where I'm not sure what type of adversaries those were, whether they were debt collectors or narcissistic relatives who were out to get her. I don't know what it was, or maybe one of her children was targeted, or one of her children was arrested unjustly. Well, such things also happen today. The judge, for a long time, ignored her. Just, I'm not going to deal with this. I don't want it. Because he doesn't want it, doesn't want it. You have to just deal with it, doesn't want it. He wills what he wills and should deal with his will. That was his attitude. But this widow, we knew that she was right, kept pressing on. And eventually, the situation began to wear out that narcissist. That judge realized, let me say like this, he didn't want to realize this, but he realized who he really was. He realized how self-absorbed, narcissistic, and abusive he was. He had to face himself. And he was very uncomfortable with that. Because people that are heading towards reprobation or people that persist in the negative, they don't want to face themselves. They don't want to bear that. So they project all their defects onto others so that they are the leaf. So they are the leaf seekers. Now this man, this judge couldn't seek relief anymore because this widow wouldn't tolerate it. And she caused trouble onto the man because listen, the first time she came, he should have looked into her case. The first time he should have done something about it. The fact that it took so long, when that comes out, other judges and maybe the government of Rome itself would come after him. The people out there may turn on him because there's a woman in need and he refuses to help. So that widow was troubling him. Well, actually, it was he himself that caused the trouble because he didn't want to comply with justice, even though he should as a judge. If the widow would just accept his no for an answer and put up with whatever she's going through, he would be at ease, he could sleep easily at night. But this widow persisted in justice, and his injustice began to haunt him. And began to haunt those around him also. It's the same as when Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Pharaoh, it's not only Pharaoh, both Pharaoh and the Egyptians resisted God's will and began to haunt them. And eventually they had to comply with God's will, and it was at their expense they ruined themselves. That is what happens with the wicked. In this case, in this parable also, because people that are on the way to reprobation, they don't want to face themselves. They don't want to do self-reflection. They really don't want to do that. When they want something, you better align with their will, because if they're frustrated, they don't want to deal with frustration, they dump. Some attack instantly. Others are a bit more cool, but that's how reprobates are. Now, this reprobate, or let me say, this man on his way to reprobation, whether it was a reprobate or on its way, well, he had to face himself. And the Lord, Christ said, hear what unjust just said. Now, what did unjust said? Though I fear not God, nor regards men, which is very disturbing, both those statements, yet, because this widow troubled me, so what happened here? He blamed it on the widow. So when you look at it carefully, it's not the widow that caused him trouble. He persisted in injustice, and because the widow refused to get along with injustice, it escalated. If he would just admit, ma'am, I was wrong, I should have looked into your case, I'm going to do it now. If he would have just complied with justice, it would have been all right. But he persisted, and now internally he's troubled. But now he externalized it, saying the widow's troubling me. Now, to some extent, you can say that's true because the widow didn't take his attitude. On the other hand, he had the attitude. He persisted in it. So, yet, because this widow troubled me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. So he became aware of his limitations. He became aware of that he is mortal, just like her, and even though he doesn't consider God nor other people, he will have to deal with God eventually, because he realized this woman has someone standing behind her, and that someone is not a regular human being nor any human group. It's a higher power. And I, as a Roman judge, I worship evil spirits. So it's not an evil spirit, so it must be God himself. Oh, I don't want to think about him. So let me just work with this woman voluntarily, because I'm already am pressured to do this, and if I have to do this out of necessity, I have to do it out of necessity. I'm finished. That is what was going through the mind of this unjust judge. So he, even when things were backfiring onto him, he was blaming the victim, because that widow was the victim. She was the one being victimized. She came to him for help. He should have helped her. Instead, he enabled evil. So he was the perpetrator. She was the victim. She was a double victim. Yet she was blamed. That's how it often goes in this world. When there's injustice and you refuse to get along with injustice, folks will turn on you. And when they turn on you, and you don't faint, you don't die, you don't lose your mind, but you persist in faith, and you keep rising up despite all the blows, your persistence and your faith is going to trouble those that that we're dumping on you. And sooner or later, both the perpetrators and the enablers will be haunted internally, that means in their head and externally. But what's going to happen when then they're going to blame you, even though you're the one persisting in righteousness. So, what Christ made plain this parable is you should not align yourself with the narcissistic abuse of the world. Yes, you ought to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Yes, you ought to be loving towards all people, but you can't walk in love with all people. So you ought to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. So repetition is natural and often necessary, but only repetitions in line with Christ. And just understand the following. Delusional cowards, or people that are on their way to reprobation, or just cowards in general, you can call them enablers, they won't stop by themselves because they made up their mind this is what we want. We want it, so we just want it. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to be dealt with. They just want to be left alone so they can continue in their filth and in their darkness. And they want to continue in the darkness unchallenged, not being bothered by anyone, and everyone just has to take whatever they do. Even if what they do causes harm on the whole community, the community just has to find a way to do this so they are at ease. So they're so self-occupied that the I is only one that's important. They only regard themselves at the expense of others and eventually at their own expense also. Because you can't only regard you exclusively at the expense of the community, because you need you in the community to remain sane and to remain healthy. So those evildoers or those enablers, they are enabling and spreading destruction. And they're not going to stop unless they are stopped. Now in the world, they only have violence to hinder them. You as a believer, you have something far better than violence. You have the power of God himself, in which you endure, overrule, and eventually you trample upon the evil and the violence that's around you and that comes against you. Because eventually, evildoers wear themselves out. Eventually, enablers wear themselves out. Eventually, evil itself wears itself out. So when you keep enduring and you keep overcoming, you persist in the faith. When you do that, you wear out the evil around you. And that's how you destroy evil. Not by returning evil for evil, but you are actually what's happening is that evil uses its strength against you. And what happens is you have the power of God, you overtake that strength of evil, and now evil's using its own strength, thinking it's coming against you, but it's really killing itself. That's what happens when you walk by faith. So keep on praying in line with Christ. You will overcome, while evildoers, and enablers around you wear themselves out. That will be your testimony, that you persisted in the faith, that evil destroyed itself around you. Violence will wear itself out and destroy itself the moment you continue to walk by faith. By the way, violence is already destroying itself, though to Christ's victory at Calvary. But in your life as an individual believer, you will overcome, and you will overcome on the behalf of someone else, because you're also there on the behalf of the weaker ones, or the sheep that need to be fed. You will overcome by wearing out evil. And you do that by overcoming, that means overruling evil with good. So agree with Christ. Be at peace.